One of the main characteristics of zombies is that they are oozing and dripping liquids, and chunks of them drop off here and there, leaving a mess on the sidewalk. Why is all of this disgustingness such an essential part of this monster, which is tailor-made to terrorize us?
Human beings are disturbed by things that cross certain boundaries that we don't think should be crossed. One of the most important boundaries there is the one that falls between the self and the other. We don't find apples or chairs or Brad Pitt disturbing because they all clearly fall into the category the other. Even gross things like pond scum and slugs and dead skunks aren't that repulsive because they fall clearly into the category of the other. But there is a group of things that is not so easily categorized.
Nail clippings, excrement, blood, pus, sweat, open wounds, and even that skin that forms on the top of milk back in the olden days.
These things are not entirely other, nor are they part of the self. They are kind of self, but they're kind of other. Philosopher Julia Kristeva calls these things, the things that transgress the boundaries between the self and the physical world, she calls them the abject. In Powers of Horror, an essay on objection, Kristeva describes her take on the process by which identity is created, and how the abject fits into the process. Identity formation is a process involving the establishment of boundaries between that which is the self and that which is not the self. It begins with the individual making a distinction between the self and the mother's body. The individual will create a boundary between the self and the other by pushing away anything that isn't me.
But some things will invariably fall in between. That's the abject. It's both me and not me. Blood, pus, sweat, a dead body.
According to Kristeva, the abject often evokes the physical reaction of nausea because it reminds us of the fragility of the boundaries that constitute the self. We are both horrified and fascinated by things abject. Now, the reason I bring all this up is perhaps now obvious. Zombies are composed largely of things that make up the abject, and consequently they generate fascination and revulsion in the viewing audience. They evoke the fear of the abject. They challenge identity in the same way that the abject does. For something to fit into the category of the abject, they need to inhabit that space between the self and the not-self. First, they need to have a strong association to the self. This is an easy task for the zombie, because it looks just like us. It is the most human of all the monsters. Secondly, the abject must be not the self. Zombies accomplish this by their state of decay and the bodily fluids that spew and ooze out of them. I mean, they've got practically all this stuff. Open wounds and pus and blood, usually black or congealed. The zombie then can be classified as Kristeva's abject because it disturbs identity, system, and order. It does not respect borders, positions, or rules.
One more interesting little tidbit. Humans nowadays are quite a bit more disturbed by bodily fluids and secretions than were our ancestors. According to Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, one of the features of secular society is a withdrawal from certain modes of intimacy, as well as taking distance from certain bodily functions.
Where once people were advised not to blow one's nose into the tablecloth, we now leave the table to perform the same act. In a world where bodily functions are rarely, if ever, mentioned in front of company, how much more offensive is the dripping, seeping, oozing mass of chunks and fluid that is the zombie? In a material-only reality, identity is formulated against only material things in the physical world. There is the self and there is the other, but there are things that fall in between.
Pus, blood, the skin on top of milk, and zombies.
The things that do both fascinate and repel us, including the zombies. In our next zombie video, we'll be taking up the topic, the objectification of the body. But for now, thank you, and we'll see you next time.